Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024. You are listening to the Daly Dose Sports Podcast, and I am your host, Clint Daly, coming to you from my high city here in Denver, Colorado, and we are back for another week of talking sports with a dose of common sense. Hey, happy Wednesday to you. Hope your week is going well. Hope everybody in your world is staying strong and staying healthy right now. And yes, kids, we are once again halfway to another weekend. And don't look now, but Major League Baseball, yeah, it's suddenly worth watching because we do have now playoff baseball, and suddenly baseball gets interesting. I know it's a long, dry, boring season. I can't bring myself to watch it. Oh, but playoff baseball? No, I'll actually tune in a little bit to playoff baseball. Playoff baseball is actually a little bit fun. But just real quick before we get into those MLB playoffs, we did lose Pete Rose at the age of 83 on Monday, which is crazy because I had actually taken the over on 83.5. Hey, this is why you don't bet on sports, kids. Rose, of course, was a 17-time All-Star. He holds the major league record for games played, plate appearances, and the NL record for the longest hitting streak of all time. But of course, Rose undermined his on-field accomplishments with his off-field gambling, including gambling on his own games. And for that, Major League Baseball banned him from the Hall of Fame. Now, should Charlie Hustle be in the Hall of Fame? I've told you my stance on this before. I'm a big believer that Hall of Fames should be like 5 stories high, and then you have the first balloters going in the penthouse up top, and then you have the second, third, fourth balloters, all the way down. And then maybe you put Rose and the steroid guys in the basement behind like a beaded curtain, like where they used to put the dirty movies in the old video rental stores. But hey, that's just me. But I mean, baseball will miss Pete Rose. Like it or not, they have a relationship with that guy and they will miss Pete Rose. But of course, now we have playoff baseball. And like I said, that is excellent news. So in the American League, the number 6 Detroit Tigers are facing the number 3 Houston Astros. And it feels like the Tigers have been playing for their lives for like a month. So they are dangerous. But Houston has been the best team in baseball lately. I don't know. Houston is very, very dangerous to me. The number 5 Kansas City Royals may have backed into the playoffs a little, sure. But make no mistake, they can play. They will be facing a very young, very talented number 4 Baltimore Orioles team. Now, the winner of Tigers and Astros will advance to play the number 2 Cleveland Guardians and that nasty pitching that they have. And the winner of the Royals-Orioles will advance to face that monster lineup of the number 1 New York Yankees. Now, I'll be honest. Making my pick in the American League, I'm going to stick with the hot team. I'm going to go with Houston to represent the American League. In the National League, the New York Mets are now the number 6 seed after they had to kind of do that little play-in thing on Monday. They will be facing the number 3 Milwaukee Brewers. Yes, that means that the Mets have gone from Milwaukee on Sunday to Atlanta on Monday, back to Milwaukee on Tuesday. Hey, the Mets are getting some frequent flyer miles. I love the Mets starting pitching, but I do worry about that bullpen. And I do want to see, can Milwaukee ever do anything in the postseason for a change? That would be a change of pace. The Atlanta Braves are the number 5 seed. They are facing the number 4 San Diego Padres. The Braves starting pitching is suddenly warming up. And hey, we know the Padres are stocked with talent everywhere, and that bullpen is very, very good. The winner of Mets versus Brewers will advance to play those Philadelphia Phillies, who are the number 2 seed. And the winner of Braves-Padres will move on to play the number 1 seed Los Angeles Dodgers, who are trying to live up to all of that hype they have with that incredible lineup. My pick on the national side will be those Philadelphia Phillies, and I'm going to go ahead and stick with the Phillies to win the whole thing. But I will tell you this. I will tell you what I absolutely cannot wait to see. You just know that Major League Baseball would love to have the number 1 New York Yankees facing the number 1 Los Angeles Dodgers in the World Series. Hey, it would get no better than that. It would give them a huge ratings bump without a doubt. Yankees versus Dodgers, Judge versus Ohtani, those 2 massive markets. I don't even care about baseball, and I'd have to watch some of it. But we also know this. We know that number one seeds do not meet in the World Series very often. Hey, it hasn't happened since 2020, and that was a COVID year, so we can throw that out. Before that, we have to go clear back to 2013 when we saw both number one seeds actually make it to the Fall Classic. Hey, it's only happened 7 times. It almost seems like the teams that have been playing their way just to get into the playoffs, and they've been feeling that pressure and feeling like they've been playing in the playoffs for the last week or two, they're just kind of used to it. And so they keep it rolling. We keep seeing wild card teams advancing and crashing the party, and I don't think it's an accident. I think it's kind of like those playing games in March Madness. Hey, you kind of got the first one out of the way. Let's keep it rolling. And those teams that have been sitting on the shelf and waiting, bizarrely, they're kind of at a little bit of a disadvantage. Hey, buckle up for what should be a very entertaining Major League Baseball postseason. Hey, today on the show, we have a few more news stories to discuss, including those WNBA playoffs, which have been incredible. And then I want to toss out a thought that I had on the world of college sports. And I just kind of want to see what you think. Plus, we do have a Daly Dose top 5 for this week. Hey, we saw some history being made this past week in the world of sports, and it wasn't actually the good kind. But first, yes, we had a wild weekend in college football. We saw Alabama putting on a clinic against Georgia, only to see Georgia come all the way back. Alabama had to scrape out a win at the end. A really fun weekend in college football. But some big news in college football this past week took place when Nevada, Las Vegas quarterback Matt Sluka decided that because of promises that he says weren't being upheld off the field, he would no longer play for the team this season. He claims the school promised him more money. The school says that's not true. Whatever, he's gone. And UNLV was undefeated and actually kind of have an outside shot of being that group of 5 team that could play their way into the playoff. Now, they did keep it rolling without him. So maybe it isn't that he is all that special, but he's gone. And we're going to see if UNLV can keep it going. But let me ask you this. Didn't we already see this exact situation play out at Florida? The only difference down at Gainesville was that the kid hadn't played yet. So I'm telling you right now, this is just going to keep happening. Unless you start having players and schools sign contracts. And if you start having them sign contracts, then guess what's coming next? Yeah, you're going to have a salary cap. And then if you have contracts, then you're going to be able to fire kids for not living up to their contracts. Hey, I'm telling you, this is all coming. And I know this is what players want, and I understand it. But just be prepared for a lot of kids to get chewed up and spit out because it's coming. Oh, and one more thing. The transfer portal cannot just be a permanent revolving door. You can't just transfer anytime, as many times as you want. Here's what I will say. A lot of these boosters are people that are very, very rich. And they're promising money to kids. And it's okay if they lie to the kids, right? But you know what rich people hate? They hate being lied to themselves. So I'm telling you, all this stuff going on at the college level with the NIL deals and the transfer portal, it isn't sustainable. It is going to come crashing down. And you know what I bet? I bet it crashes down soon. And I bet it's going to crush a few poor kids when it does. Don't say you didn't know, because it is coming. Moving over to the NBA, and yes, we got very, very sad news when it was reported that former big man in the NBA, and of course Denver Nugget, Dikembe Mutombo passed away on Monday, apparently of brain cancer. They didn't let that out too much. It kind of seemed like they kept that quiet, but that was obviously a very, very tragic passing. Dikembe Mutombo had a big history here in Denver. Loved watching him play. Just a defensive monster inside. You want to get the shot off over him and not have him wave his finger at you? Good luck, because Dikembe was a terror inside. We did also get a trade take place over the weekend because the New York Knicks and Minnesota Timberwolves are finalizing a blockbuster deal involving All-Stars Julius Randle and Karl Anthony Towns. Now, the deal would send Randle and Dante DiVincenzo up to Minnesota, and Towns would end up in New York for the Knicks. I mean, the Knicks get a center in Towns that would shore up their biggest weakness. They don't have a big guy inside. And Minnesota, not sure I'm sold on this from their perspective, but they add some shooting and they get a little bit of versatility as opposed to having the two big men. Remember, Minnesota did go all the way to the Western Conference Finals this past year. Now, like I said, I'm not fully sold on this deal for Minnesota. I actually kind of thought they were building something special. But keep in mind, making this deal means we kind of break up those Villanova Knicks, right? Because we did have DiVincenzo, Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges. They're not going to be together anymore. And then Towns goes back to playing for Tom Thibodeau, his head coach, who he did play for from 16 to 19. And you just know when Towns got the news, because he is a New York guy, he's like, hey, really? Yeah, I get to go back to New York. Oh, wait. That guy tried to kill me last time. And, Towns doesn't always strike me as someone that likes to deal with the mental aspect that much. Always has those dumb fouls, will kind of melt down. Can you imagine what's going to happen when Karl Anthony Towns commits like 4 fouls in like 30 seconds with that Madison Square Garden crowd? Yeah, good luck. Oh, and by the way, Tibbs is going to kill you. Yeah, Cat's knees are going to fall right off the bone like a slow-cooked beef brisket playing for Tibbs. That might not be the greatest trade for either one of those teams. Okay, but now let's get over to those WNBA playoffs that have now reached the semifinal level, and there are some teams playing really, really well. It's been really, really exciting. Hang on. You know what? I'm getting a message. Looks like we're out of time for the news. You know what? Sorry about that. I know we kind of keep getting up against it with the WNBA playoffs. Hey, maybe next week. Maybe it'll advance, I don't know, to the quarterfinals or I don't know, whatever that next level is at the WNBA. You never know is what I'm saying. You never know.
You know what they say? Fool me once, strike one. But fool me twice, strike three.
Okay, so please don't get this twisted. I am not saying that I want to actually reconfigure the college sports landscape. It seems that we're boiling college sports down to 4 major conferences and basically 3 or 4 major sports, and that's about it. And while I wish there was a little more balance geographically, I think that this is just kind of the circle of life. I mean, this is just how things are trending, right? However, I had a thought, and I want you just to humor me for a sec. You know that I have a background in high school coaching. And how do we classify high school athletic teams? Well, we do it by school population. If you have this many students, then you're this classification. And if you have this many students, you're this classification. What if we classified colleges in the same way? And you might hear that and think, well, isn't that what we do now? Aren't all the D1A schools roughly the same size? No, they're not. In fact, they're not even close. Right now, I'm going to show you how these divisions would break down. And you might be just a little bit surprised if we reclassified college sports by school population. So let's start off with the 8A schools. Yes, 8A. I don't know what state you live in. 8A would be huge here in the state of Colorado. These would be the biggest universities in the country. The population minimum would be 50,000 students. Now, if I were to ask you, Daly Dose listener, what school is the largest in population in our country, you would probably list the usual suspects, right? Ohio State, Michigan, Florida, Texas, Illinois, Washington, Texas A&M, Cincinnati, Minnesota, Michigan State, Arizona State, and you'd be exactly right. All those schools are over 50K. They would be in this division. Oh, but the largest school in the country, population-wise? Yeah, that would be Jerry Falwell's Liberty University. It has over 95,000 students. For the record, second place is Arizona State at just 77,000. Hey, that surprised me. Because, we always kind of think of Liberty as like the little guy. Oh, come on. Win one for the little guy, Liberty. Yeah, they're not little at all. I also didn't expect Florida International to be here. Rutgers, Central Florida, and Georgia State, they are also all on this list. Remember, a few years back, Georgia State pulled off an upset in March Madness. Oh, the little guy won. Yeah, except they aren't little at all. They're huge. They're just not very good, but there are your 8A schools. Kind of an odd league, right? And it does make you wonder, why aren't some of these schools a little bit better? We move down one notch to the next level, and that is the 7A schools that have between 45 and 50,000 students. And again, some of the schools aren't going to surprise you. USC, Penn State, Cal, Indiana, Arizona, Wisconsin, Florida State, and UCLA would be 7A. But we would also see Texas Tech, North Texas, South Florida, Purdue, and Kennesaw State.
Who?
Yeah, Kennesaw State. They have 45,000 students. Why aren't you better at sports, Kennesaw State? I don't know why. Let's drop down to 6A. And we have a very competitive division here. Georgia, Alabama, Utah, LSU, Colorado and Colorado State, Virginia Tech, and BYU would be 6A schools. This would be the 35 to 40,000 range. Oh, and also San Jose State, Texas State, Temple, and Texas San Antonio would be here. Why is this division so top heavy? Some really, really good athletic schools and then some really, really bad ones down lower. Let's move down to 5A. And this league might not actually impress you that much for football, but can you imagine these schools that would be around the 28 to 32,000 range? Can you imagine this conference in basketball? North Carolina, UConn, Tennessee, Missouri, Iowa State, Kentucky, UNLV, Washington State, Florida Atlantic, Auburn, and Pitt. Yeah, that's a big monster of a school in hoops. Oh, and they'd be beating up on schools like Buffalo, Charlotte, and UMass, who is way bigger than I thought they were. I didn't know those schools were that big. Okay, let's go down to 4A. Schools that have between 25 and, 30 grand. And here we see schools like Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. I thought they were bigger. Nebraska, Virginia, Clemson, West Virginia, and Boise State would also be 4A schools. Hey, but those are all pretty legit sports programs, right? But did you know that schools like Utah State, Ohio, not Ohio State, Ohio U, East Carolina, and Kent State are the same size as those schools? Because I sure didn't. Those schools better up their athletic budgets. They're going to hang with that group. Let's drop down to the 3A schools, which would be around the 20 to 25,000 range. And here we have schools like Oregon. Thought it was a little bigger. Louisville, Syracuse, Ole Miss, Northwestern, and New Mexico. It's an interesting mix, right? And then you also have James Madison, who is rolling right now in football. Look out for James Madison. Sam Houston, Alabama, Birmingham, and Old Dominion. Again, remember just a few years back, Old Dominion beat Virginia Tech, and it was like the biggest upset ever. But I mean, Old Dominion isn't that small. They're running like 25,000 students. I was thinking they were like a smaller school than that. At the 2A classification, we have schools ranging from 16 to 21,000 students. And we have littler schools. We have Appalachian State, Ball State, Western Kentucky, and Toledo. Of course, we also have schools like Stanford and Duke. They're not that big. No real surprise here. But I would be a little surprised to learn that teams like Baylor, Miami, and Kansas State are this small. Not sure if I knew that. That is the 2A schools. We are now down to the 1A schools, and that is schools with a population between 12 and 16,000 in them. So you have schools like Central Michigan, Tulane, Troy, Southern Mississippi, and Northern Illinois. But we also have schools like Boston College, Vanderbilt, and yes, Notre Dame. Hey, Notre Dame competes with the big boys, despite being a very small school in terms of population. I mean, I know they have money, and I know they put a big focus on athletics there, but that's not a big school. I mean, you would be looking at a 2A classification here. So let's finish off with the smallest schools population-wise at the Division 1A level, and we would have our single A schools. These are schools with just 5 to 10,000 students. And here, again, we have some schools you would totally expect. Louisiana Tech, yeah, small. Rice, of course. Tulsa, which is actually the smallest school in the country, Tulsa has a population right now of about 3,800 students. That's not as big as some high schools. And then, of course, we have the 3 military academies, Army, Navy, and Air Force, and somehow they find ways to compete every single season. But again, at the single A level, there's a few schools that surprised me. Marshall, I didn't know they were that small. Coastal Carolina, SMU, the team, I might add, that just got done smoking Florida State in football this past week, SMU. You also have Wake Forest, Wyoming, and TCU. Hey, those are among the smallest schools in the entire country. Again, I'm not saying that college sports should even do this, although it would be definitely interesting. But when you see these schools separated by their actual size, it does shed some light on which schools are actually overachieving and which schools, for their size and their resources and honestly their money, are really not doing all that much in terms of athletic prowess. They're kind of just skating by. Now, as we do so many weeks here at the Daily Dose, we need to get over to our Daily Dose top 5. Hey, we just saw the Chicago White Sox fall 4-1 to the Detroit Tigers last Friday for their 121st loss of the season. The most, I might add, in Major League Baseball history. Yeah, that mark broke the previous record set by the expansion New York Mets back in '62. And, going into this season, we all expected the Oakland A's to be terrible, and they were. We expected the Los Angeles Angels, the Angels to be bad, and they also were. I literally always know my Colorado Rockies are going to be horrible. They never let me down. But who saw the White Sox setting the record for worst team ever? I mean, honestly, you have to try to be that bad. And the White Sox, I'll give them credit, they tried their hardest. But who are the worst teams ever? Who are the teams that just focused and refused to get going when the going got tough? Today, our Daily Dose Top 5 is counting down the worst teams in sports history. And yes, I'm staying with pro sports teams because I feel bad calling out college kids. We start off at number 5 in the NHL, where the 92-93 Ottawa Senators make our list because they had one of the worst inaugural seasons ever. Now, the NHL had expanded from 21 to 24 teams, but when it did, most people were surprised that Ottawa even got a franchise. I mean, they had to play their games at the Ottawa Civic Center. It only held 6,500 fans. And the Senators started their season by losing their first 39 games on the road. The only road victory they had came in April, and they got a win over the Islanders. And that game actually ended up being the only points they collected on the road all year. Okay, so the Senators were horrible on the road. The problem is they weren't much better at home. They set the record for longest home losing streak in NHL history at 11 games. And while there have been some impressively bad teams in the history of the NHL, those 92-93 Ottawa Senators, yeah, they were the worst one in NHL history, and they come in today on our list at number 5. We arrive at number 4, and we go to Major League Baseball, and in the history of the league up until this season, only 2 teams have won less than 27% of their games in a season. The 62 Mets that we talked about earlier, and the 2003 Detroit Tigers. Now, I'm going to give the Mets a little bit of a pass because that was an expansion team and everyone knew they were going to be horrible. But that also kind of makes the 03 Tigers the worst team since like World War II. They went from 79 wins in 2000 to 66 in 01. to 55 in 02. And then they bottomed out at 43 wins in 03. The 03 Tigers went 43 and 119. Here's what's worse. They had a run differential of a negative 337. By comparison, this year's White Sox have a negative 310 run differential. Hey, the Tigers' best pitcher went 6 of 17. He had a 4.67 ERA. The 2003 Detroit Tigers are one of the worst teams in MLB history, without a doubt. And they come in today at number 4. We move next to number 3. And we go back in NBA history for this one. Now, there were only 17 teams in the NBA at this point, and this was back in the 72-73 season. And somehow, the Philadelphia 76ers finished 12 games behind 16th place. What makes this even harder to believe, this was the same team that had gone 68-13 and won it all just 6 years previous. But that's what happens when you trade away an all-time great, Wilt Chamberlain, for basically nothing, and then you make terrible draft choice after terrible draft choice. From 67 to 72, the only even kind of good player Philadelphia drafted was Dennis Autry, and he wasn't great. They traded him 3 games into his 3rd season. So remember just back in the mid-2000s when the 76ers were trusting the process? Even then, they weren't this bad. That team went 10-72. That only puts them in 2nd place in NBA history because this team went 9-73. The 72-73 Philadelphia 76ers had losing streaks of 13, 14, 15, and 20 games. They were 4-58 mid-February, and then somehow they won 5 of their next 7 games, but never for a year. They closed out the season by losing 13 games in a row. Yes, the 72-73 Philadelphia 76ers are the worst team in NBA history, and they come in today on our list at number 3. We move next to number 2, and we reach a team that is one of the worst in modern day history, and of course, it comes from the NFL. Because, we actually care about the NFL. The 2008 Detroit Lions, they were terrible. They failed to win even a single game. They went 0-16. But in addition to just not winning, they gave up the 2nd highest number of points in any season, 517. President and GM Matt Millen's final season was just the perfect culmination of what he had done in Detroit. The 08 Lions finished with a negative 249 point differential. They finished with the perfect 0-16 record. You know what's crazy? Poor wide receiver Calvin Johnson, he still managed to have a 1,300-yard season receiving the ball. That's amazing, especially considering the quarterbacks he had. Long past his prime, Dante Culpepper, John Kitna, and Dan Orlovsky. And each member of that trio lost at least 4 games. And of course, we remember Orlovsky's infamous safety where he just ran out of the back of the end zone. The 2008 Detroit Lions defense allowed 32 points per game. The Lions were horrible, and they come in today on our list at number 2. So we reach the number 1 worst team in sports history, and we go back to a team that I actually just barely remember, and they were so bad. The 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers are largely considered one of the worst teams ever in the history of sports and in the history of the NFL. The team suffered 5 shutouts. They had 0 wins. They went 0-14. Now, remember, the Bucs were an expansion team, and the NFL actually initially placed them in the AFC West. Well, that was the wrong place to put them because the AFC West was pretty tough. The Bucs went 0-4 in the AFC West, and they lost those games to the Raiders, the Broncos, the Chiefs, and the Chargers by a combined score of 48-148. 0-14 Buccaneers minus 287 point differential is one of the worst ever. If you don't know anything about this team, Steve Spurrier was actually the quarterback. And not only did the Bucs lose, they only were even close in 2 games. And again, they lost 5 shutouts. The poor Buccaneers didn't end up winning their first game until week 13 of the 77 season against the horrible New Orleans Saints. But hey, by 1979, I'll give him credit. Head coach John McKay actually got this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team to the NFC Championship game, and they lost a close game to the Rams. Hey, we have seen teams that have gone through these horrible seasons before, and many of them use them to fortify their rosters pretty soon. These horrible teams are right back in contention. Will the Chicago White Sox be another one of those teams that uses this season to rebuild? I'm not so sure, but I guess we're going to find out. Hey, next week on The Dose, we will, of course, be keeping you up on all that is going on in the world of sports. And I know all of the NFL and college teams that were getting all the hype going into the season, but we might be looking at which teams should we start paying a little more attention to next week. So be sure you stop by The Dose and be sure you let a friend know to do the same. Hey, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for listening to the Daly Dose every week. Thank you for the emails, texts, and tweets. You know you can always email the podcast at dailydosesports@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. But we also want to say thank you for stopping by dailydosesports.com, where we have new articles going up every week. And yes, we had an article go up this week about the Denver Broncos and how they might have to be thankful to a very unlikely source. Might want to stop by dailydosesports.com and check that out. But we do have links to the podcast there. We do have links to the YouTube video there. So I want to say thank you for stopping by dailydosesports.com. But more than anything, I want to say thank you for sharing the show, for sharing the videos, for sharing the articles with someone that you know. We absolutely love it when you do that. Have to say thank you to Jess P. Could not do any of this without you. I will see you all next Wednesday. Have a great week, everybody.
You know what they say? Fool me once, strike one. But fool me twice, strike three.